Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Comics. I'm your host, Jim Viscardi, and this is the podcast where we dive deep into the origin stories of your favorite creators who are producing some of the best serialized storytelling week in, week out, 12 months a year for you, the comic book fan. Before we get into today's guest, some business. I got to give thanks to everyone who's been tuning in and supporting the show. This is a labor of love, and I'm glad that so many people have also found so much enjoyment listening to the last few episodes. We've had Kyle Higgins, Jason Aaron, Rick Remender, today's guest, and a whole bunch of future guests lined up, so I'm really excited to keep the train rolling. If you want, it would mean a lot if you could, if you want to support the show, obviously, if you leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. If I read them at the end of the show, we'll send you a free Let's Talk Comics sticker. It really does help. And the other thing that I'd love to also do, if you're listening to this, take a screenshot of the episode you're listening to. Share it on Instagram. Share it on Blue Sky. Share it wherever. Tag me. I would love to share it. I'd love to know which episodes you're digging, which ones you're listening to. So make sure you are doing that. All right. Now, on to today's guest, because this one is a good one. I've known Marjorie Liu for a real long time. I was there when she came in to do some work at Marvel, and it has been phenomenal to watch her career grow and explode and expand in the way that it has. She is no doubt a trailblazer, and a trailblazer who, at her heart, like all she ever wanted to do was be a storyteller. Yeah, she went to school to pursue a law degree, but at the end of the day, telling stories is what she wanted to do, and she knew she could do it, and she is the true story of persistence. You may know her from her work at Marvel like X-23 or Dark Wolverine, or if you're like me, you have been 100% captivated by her creator-owned series, Monstress, with artist Sana Takeda. Monstress is, I mean, look, not only does it look phenomenal, but it is so emotionally complex that there is a reason it is one of the most decorated books in recent years. She's got multiple Eisner and Hugo Awards under its belt, and I'm sure there are more to come. So today we're going to dive into Marjorie's career, her journey from starting as a novelist and making the jump to comics. And at the very end, we're going to talk a little bit about Monstress 55, which in February marks a pretty big return for the book. And we're all here excited for it. So whether you're a longtime fan of Marjorie's work or you're just finding it for the first time, this is a conversation that you are going to take away so much from. There is insight, inspiration, and just a look at the creative process from one of the top writers in the game. So, again, if you're listening to this, take a screenshot, share it, let us know. Otherwise, you're done hearing me talk. You want to hear her talk. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's talk comics. Marjorie, welcome.
Jim, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh man, this is gonna be fun. Only because it's so funny. Where just a few months ago, you and I had the opportunity to reconnect a little bit and realized how long we've actually kind of known each other. It's
been a while. It has been a while.
And so, like I said, I'm excited to chat today because you've had quite the career. You've done just about everything. You've dabbled in all kinds of genres with superheroes and beyond. So I guess, we, like all chats like this, we kind of have to start all the way to the beginning a little bit.
When I was in diapers.
No. But more like when did you get bit by the comics bug?
Oh man, I got bit by the comics bug a little late. Again, when I grew up, I didn't live near a comic book store.
Right.
And my friends read comics, but I didn't get into it. I was just reading, regular old books.
Sure.
It took me a while to understand the appeal, but comics were all around me because again, my friends were into it. But not having access to a comic book store, not really just it's it, I didn't get it.
Right.
And
No,
then
that's fair.
I didn't get it. And then I watched the X-Men cartoon on Fox.
Hmm.
And I think as many people did in the 90s. And I was like, "Oh shit. This is the X-Men? This is what everyone's been talking about and
Right. Uh-huh.
I didn't understand." Like,
Right.
"Oh fuck me," because it was so good. It
Yep.
was it was the most amazing thing I had seen ever. And I became obsessed with the cartoon, the animated series.
Hmm. Right.
Um, so then I go away to college, and just down the street there was a comic book store, Powerhouse Comics in Appleton, Wisconsin.
Okay.
And I wandered in one day and just took the deep dive. My
You
first
just go.
X-Men oh my gosh, my first X-Men comic started during Operation Zero Tolerance. And it was the first issue that Cecilia Reyes appears in.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't even care about getting the whole arc. I just grabbed an issue. I grabbed anything that looked interesting. It was Punisher, it was Deadpool. I just grabbed things off the shelf, took them
Right.
home, started reading, and then became obsessed. And I was the kind of comic book reader. I had my long boxes. I got the boards. I saved everything. Honest to God, I I am not entirely sure where my long boxes are.
Oh no.
I think they're in my parents' garage.
Okay. Well,
I think that's where they are. I am not sure. And having to go look for them kind of terrifies me because I'm going to have to do a lot of digging. But
right.
now that I've thought of it, I think the next time I visit my folks, I'm just gonna have to do it.
Oh man.
Um, but
Just think of
that's
the treasure you're just gonna
oh
unbox
my gosh.
when you get there.
I can't even imagine because I started collecting. I was collecting older issues
Right.
from the 70s. I was doing all of it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
It's so
so
funny because I had a similar start in the sense that comics were always around me, right? The '90s cartoon,
mhm.
or like comic related things, right? The Spider-Man, like that whole slew of '90s cartoons, I was obsessed with, and then I got into a lot of the video, like Marvel vs. Capcom. I think was one of my
Mhm.
like as formative memories. I didn't actually get into reading comics until Ed Brubaker killed Captain America, and I saw it was on
Oh,
the news. It was on the news everywhere, and I said, well, this is it. I can't. I can't believe they did that, and two, I'm diving in, right, just like straight into the deep end. And so it was right around the time Civil War ended, and I just like became obsessed. I set up subscriptions. I was following every book that like came out of Civil War,
mhm.
and then immediately just started going backwards and just doing my homework. And it's one of those things that I tell a lot of folks who sometimes like feel overwhelmed potentially jumping into
Yeah.
comics. And I was like, the beauty about this is you can just kind of jump in,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
then you can work backwards if you want, and then you just have to stay along for the ride moving forward if you like what you read. And not a lot of stuff is, like not a lot of stuff is kind of like that. I think like streaming has made it a little bit easier, but even like before that, like comics is kind of the only thing that you could really kind of do that with, and I loved it. So yeah, so I totally get it. um okay, so it sounds like the X-Men were kind of
That was my entry.
favorites.
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, they were definitely my entry drug. And it's funny because after that, I was always a Marvel girl.
Sure.
Yeah, like sure, I loved reading
Protected.
Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, but Marvel was my comfort food.
Uh-huh.
And so my ent all 4 years of college, just
Hmm.
read comics, just nonstop. My
I
favorite
love
thing.
it.
Same thing when I
when
went on to law school too.
mhm. When did the light bulb go off for you when you realized like obviously there's the idea that people are putting these together, but when
Yeah.
did it click for you that like, oh, I'm going to follow so and so writer or potentially so and so artist with that?
Oh, you mean when did I make the decision that I would just read everything that this person has ever written,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
ever?
Right.
Um, oh, pretty early. I would say
Yeah.
pretty early on. I think, listen, Ed Brubaker,
Hmm.
was an early favorite of mine.
Hmm.
I listen, you can feel voice. Do you know
Right.
what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
voice isn't just something that's on the page. Voice is
Mhm.
something that moves through you.
Sure.
And it's the voice of the writer that draws you in. And
Hmm.
so early on, I found voices that I loved, and I just followed them. The same thing with art.
Right.
There's art is also a kind of voice that moves through you. It's a visual voice that
Hmm.
captures you. And so I think that happened almost immediately.
Okay. So you mentioned obviously you went to law school,
Yes.
and then started kind of writing. Was that did your writing start during law school, or did you kind of like graduate, do the lawyer thing for a bit, and then realize I want to do something else?
Well, all throughout, I mean, when I was a kid, like, starting probably in middle school, high school. Listen, I love to read. Reading was
Sure.
my great joy. And then I also loved to write. Now, nothing I wrote was good. I wrote a lot. Listen, I was that kid who definitely wrote a lot of melodramatic, like in my feelings, goth, sort of dark, like over like purple prose. If I listen, I found a couple things that I wrote when I was in high school and I was like, "Oh boy. Oh Lordy." Like that shit wasn't great. But I loved to write. I didn't think I
Uh-huh.
was going to become a writer. I didn't
Sure.
think that was how I was going to make money because nothing in my life, even though I was reading books all the time and I knew that technically speaking, that could be a job and people do that for a living, I didn't
Hmm.
think that was in my future. I was raised in a very practical immigrant and Midwestern family where people were teachers, they were
Hmm.
engineers, they were nurses. My dad was like doctor or lawyer.
Hmm.
And that's how I was raised. And so I
Right.
really, truly thought my future was um, going to be a very practical 9 to 5, put in your hours, that sort of thing. And it wasn't until I think maybe possibly when I was around 18, I wrote a poem.
Hmm.
And it was part of back then, college applications were a little more loosey-goosey. And so you could write a poem as part of
Right.
as part of your application. This was again, like this was in the early mid 90s. And so I wrote a poem and I was like, oh, I'm like, okay. And then later on, I got that poem published.
Oh.
And I got that poem published when I was in college. And I thought, oh, okay, that's a thing that can happen. I
Right.
still didn't think I could make a living, but I thought, oh, but it's possible to actually get something published.
Hmm.
And so time goes on. I went to college, law school, graduate from law school, all throughout law school. I read romance novels, I
Hmm.
wrote romance novels and comics, and those were the two things that sustained me through law school. And graduate law school, get accepted into the bar, and looking for a job, sending out applications. It was the worst job market for lawyers in like a decade at that time.
Okay.
This was back in 2003.
Okay.
Um, and so, I'm looking for a job, nothing's popping up, and one day I read a romance novel that was particularly bad. I won't name it, but I thought to myself, shit, I could do this. I could do this. And and then I had this idea for a first sentence. It was the first sentence popped into my head, and I sat down. I wasn't doing anything else, and so um, sat down and I started writing just based off of that first sentence. And I kept going and going and going and going and going and going. And it became this. I was obsessed. I was just really, really
Hmm.
obsessed. I just didn't stop. before, like in high school, middle school, I would always start writing my, my young masterpiece epic and always get 3 chapters in and then like
And
just
then dump it.
fiddle, like just fizz out, like just lose
Yep.
all energy and interest. This time was different. I don't know why this time was different. I just kept going until
Hmm.
suddenly a month later, because again, what else was I doing with my time? A month later, I had a novel. I had written a full novel in 1 month.
All right.
And I was like, okay, wow, I did this thing. And it was pretty shitty. So I took a couple
S-
months and I go
well,
ahead,
so
go
so
ahead.
at this point though, like, are you outside of just writing, right?
Yeah.
Did you have like any idea on like out and obviously having the experience in reading or whatever, but like what makes a novel? Like, is
Yeah.
there, or is it just like, or what kind of research are you putting in there to then either take or leave, and are you just like, I'm just going to write, and I know in my heart I know what a story is going to be.
I think in my heart I knew what a story would be just because I was a voracious reader. I mean, I always
Right.
tell people who ask me, how do you become a writer? Like, what's the best advice? And people say it all the time, but I cannot emphasize it enough. You must read.
Yeah.
And I was the kind of person who would read a book a day.
Mm.
Like I
Oh
was a
wow.
voracious reader and I read everything. I
Hmm.
didn't just read fantasy and science fiction. I read nonfiction. I read mystery. I read thrillers. I read, historical novels, everything I read.
Hmm.
And I'd been doing that for what felt like my entire life. And so there's a certain point where just intuitively, it doesn't mean that you can write a book, but it does
Right.
mean at a certain point you have an intuitive sense of what makes a story.
Absolutely.
And so I just kind of just let loose. I just wrote from the gut,
Mm.
and then I revised the same way. I sat down and I spent a couple months just revising that book.
Mm.
And at that point, I thought, well, I did this thing, so let me just see what happens. Like even if it gets rejected by everyone and never gets published, now I've proven to myself I can do this. I can
Right.
actually finish something that I start,
Mm.
um, which was it was a great feeling. So I did my research. I didn't know anything about publishing. I didn't know
Hmm.
anyone, but I just Googled advice. Just Googled it. Yo, Google has, as you'll probably hear, Google has saved my life more times than not. So anyway, I just Googled it, and there was some helpful links online. They're like, okay, yeah. So I went through all of my favorite romance novels because
Mm.
I'd written a romance novel.
Yep.
And I looked to see who people thanked in their acknowledgments, the editors.
Ah.
And I looked at the publishers of my favorite romance novels. I looked to see what agents people thanked. Then I went
Okay.
online and I researched the agents and I researched the publishers to see what
W-
their submission guidelines were.
what a way to reverse engineer that.
You know what? When you don't know anyone and you don't know shit, you do what you can do, right? So
Right.
and actually, it's advice that still works to this day. I
Yeah.
always tell people, well, what do I do? And I'm like, well, this is it. This still applies. People are
Right.
still thinking they're agents and editors in their acknowledgments. You can still go online and look to see
Yeah.
who's publishing. This is information that's still available and it still works.
Right. It's funny.
Um,
Jason Aaron said something very similar when I spoke to him. He was when he was pitching. He basically looked up editors for comics that he just liked, that he
yeah,
enjoyed, and he figured,
exactly.
well, this editor edits books that I like, and so maybe he'll like my stuff.
Yep,
And sure enough, there he goes.
it
All right. So okay.
works. This works.
So you reverse engineered it. You found out some folks, and then is it
Yep.
just
And
printing out mass
is
copies and sending them out?
you send out, well, in my case, it depended on what their guidelines said. Some people didn't want the first 3 chapters. They
Mm.
just wanted a letter and a description. Some people wanted the first 3 chapters. And some people wanted the whole book. And depending on what people asked for, that's what I submitted. I don't even know anymore how many submissions I sent out. A lot. And I got rejected from
Oh wow.
every single one, except except the day what a birthday present. The day the day before I turned 25, the day before my
Okay.
25th birthday, I get an email from an editor at a now defunct publisher called Dorchester, which eventually got swallowed up by HarperCollins,
Mhm.
from the editor, Chris Kiesler. And he was like, your book was pulled from the slush pile
Oh.
by, yep, by my assistant. I read it. I love it. And I think it's perfect for our line. And I want to buy it.
Mm.
And I did not respond. What I did
Just
was,
Google how to
no,
sell a book.
well, no, what I did was I had already had a list of all the agents that I was into
Oh.
that had rejected me, but I was still into them. I thought they were good agents.
Okay.
And there was one in particular who represented authors who wrote in many, many, many different genres. Because
Okay.
I'm an A-type personality, so I always have a plan. And I had fantasized that if I got, that my ideal agent would be someone who represented a lot of different genres because I wanted to write in a lot of
Right.
different genres. And so I reached out to an agent who had rejected me, who was at the top of my list.
Okay.
And I said, listen, I have a book contract. I have an editor who's interested in buying my book. You don't have to represent me for my entire career, but would you represent me for this contract? And if we get along, will you be my agent?
Mm.
And I was like, because
I
the
mean, the
thing
email
was,
you're sending is basically, "Hey, would you like free money?"
would you like free money? Exactly. Would you like free money? Be my agent. You don't have to do any work. The work has been done.
Right.
You just have to negotiate this contract for me.
Mhm.
And she was like, okay, okay.
Wow.
And and so that's how I sold my first book. That's how I got my first agent. And she negotiated a 4-book contract for me, as part of a series.
Mhm.
And then I had to, and this all happened pretty much in like 24, 48 hours. It happened very
Wow.
quickly. And so, because she had dealt with this editor before, so they knew each other,
Okay.
and it was very easy peasy. I had to decide, of course, at this moment, how I was going to adjust the rest of my life.
Mm.
Was I going to continue, trying to practice law, or and try to be a writer at the same time,
Hmm.
or was I going to abandon practicing law entirely, take this 4-book contract, and try to write these books rather quickly,
Sure.
establish myself more quickly as a novelist,
Mm.
and just
At this
go for
point,
broke.
did you have an idea on what the other books would have been at this
Yeah,
point, or?
they were going to be part of the a series, like the romance novel. The first romance novel I sold, Tiger Eye, was going to be the
Mhm.
first in a romance series. So the rest of
Okay.
the books were going to be part of like just sequels to that.
Sure.
Um, and I made the choice to go for broke,
How'd your parents take
and not well, not well. Um, I think, and not just my parents, even my friends. I think everyone
Oh,
thought, because
wow.
you have to understand, Jim, I didn't tell anyone what I was doing.
Oh,
I didn't
so just out of
tell,
nowhere, you're like,
this
"Oh,
came
by the
out
way."
of nowhere, because this isn't, listen, I didn't come from an environment where, I mean, listen, my family was very happy that I was a voracious reader. They were
Sure.
like, it's not
Right.
like they were like, don't read books. I mean, they were really happy. I love to read, all of it. But again, this was not a career.
Right. It
And
wasn't the typical practical job that you
no,
had initially envisioned, they had envisioned. Change
no.
is hard.
No, and it's kind of a weird thing to say out loud. I'm writing a book. Like I didn't feel comfortable. Like I'm a very, listen, I'm a deep introvert. I don't talk much about myself in general,
Hmm.
so I just decided, listen, if I'm going to fail at this, I'm going to fail quietly. And then if I
Hmm.
succeed at this, I'm going to succeed quietly as well. But either way, I just let me just do my thing without anyone
Right.
else's input. Because I have found historically that, when you're trying something new, when you are trying to, try something that you've never done before, try something that's an experiment for yourself. Sometimes inviting outside input is not the
Mm,
best idea. You know,
hmm.
not because of pride, not because of anything like that, but because you have to marshal all your resources. You have to marshal your psychic resources in order to do something new that you've never done before. And inviting other people to potentially give their opinions on that
Right.
is not always the best idea.
Sure.
And so I hadn't told anyone. So suddenly I have a 4-book contract in hand, and I reach out to my family and I'm like, guess what? I'm not going to practice law anymore. I'm just going to write full
By the
time.
way.
By the way, first of all, my mom's first response was, "This is great, but what do you know about romance?"
Oh no! Oh no!
Best response ever. And
Oh
then,
god!
and then, and my dad was like, "What?
Uh,
You what? Like you're going to you did this thing. You
right.
you are a lawyer. You're going to abandon that for this uncertain, fraught, risky career where almost no one succeeds. What are you thinking? Like, how could
Mm,
you, in some ways, how could you do this to us?
right.
Right? How could you do this to us?" And I was like,
Look,
well,
I come from a pretty traditional Sicilian family, and when I did not go into the family construction business, it was what do you mean? What do you mean?
shame,
Yeah,
shame,
what do you mean? I
shame.
said, sorry, Uncle Vinny's gonna have to find somebody else. Maybe cousin Mike can do it, but
Oh,
I'm
Jim.
gonna go play in comic book land. And like, what do you mean you're gonna play in comic book land? And I'm like, yeah, that's where I'm going. So
Jim, how could you?
how could
Shame.
I?
How
How
could you,
could I?
Shame? How could you? Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. And I, honest to God, it has been 20 years, over 20 years, and I'm still,
Mm.
I'm still not convinced I have been forgiven. But you know what? It's you, whatever. It's just you
Look,
live with it.
at the end of the day, Marjorie, you did okay.
I did okay. I did all right. You know what? It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Uh,
the family didn't take it well, but I will say this: they were like, okay, well, we don't agree. We think this is insane, but there is, my there was my family, my parents had a tiny little farm in Indiana,
mhm,
that they had gotten sort of dirt cheap, thinking that they would retire there one day. And they were like,
mhm,
okay, you can go there and live on the family farm in Indiana, and which was maybe like 20 minutes away from my grandmother, and
mhm.
just live there rent free and do
Wow.
this insane
And go
thing
for it.
and go for it and write these books, which was, listen, that saved my life because I was being paid so little for those
Right.
first 4 books. There is no other way I could have survived.
Right.
So I went down to the farm in Indiana and just started writing
Just wrote.
romance novels. And that would have been my career, except I went to was the World Fantasy Convention in Arizona, to meet my agent.
Mm.
Because I
Now, is
wanted
this
just to
the
sit.
same? Is this the same agent, the original agent, or have you
No,
gotten a new agent?
well,
This is a new
yeah,
agent at this point.
this is the agent who I'm not with her anymore, but yes, it's the same
Sure.
agent who I
Okay.
contracted with for that first book. And so I went out there to meet her and meet my editor. And it was around Halloween, and we're sitting there having coffee, chatting away, and her son runs up dressed like Spider-Man.
Mm.
And I'm like, oh, I love Spider-Man. I love comics. I love reading comics. I'm a huge comic book fan. And she said, well, that's really interesting because I know an editor at Simon and Schuster and at Pocket Books, and they just signed a licensing deal with Marvel to publish prose novels based off of their characters like Captain
Mm.
America, Spider-Man, and the X-Men. And I was
Mm.
like, oh, really? Really?
Tell me more.
Yes. And I said, I would love to write an X-Men novel. I'm a huge X-Men fan.
Mm.
This would be a dream come true. And because the Spider-Man movies were coming out. Spider-Man was like the hot grab. No one
Mm-hmm.
had actually pitched anything yet for the X-Men.
Mm.
I was the first in line. And the editor was like, okay, cool, pitch something. And I
Uh-huh.
did. And the
Wow.
pitch was accepted. And that's how I wrote my first X-Men novel. That's how in some ways, how I got my big break, by writing an
Huh.
X-Men prose novel called Dark Mirror.
Interesting.
Yep. And then what happened next? Still, I'm writing my romance novels. I'm doing my little thing on the side.
Yeah.
But I heard from the editor, well, listen, the folks at Marvel really, really liked the work that you did in this book. They thought you nailed the characters. And I was like, okay. So then I ended up at the first New York Comic Con,
Mm-hmm.
and I said to my editor, I'm like, do you know the people at Marvel? Can you introduce me to their head of recruitment?
Mm.
And she's like, sure. So I wander over to the Marvel booth. I find the guy who's in charge of recruiting talent,
Mm-hmm.
introduce myself. And I'm like, hey, I wrote this book and I would love to write comics. And if you ever need a writer, just let me know.
Mm.
I didn't know shit about writing comics.
I
I didn't know the
was gonna
first thing about writing comics, Jim. I did not know the first thing. I just knew I wanted to do it.
just wing it.
And he was like, okay. And so then he put me in but he followed up. He put me in
Uh-huh.
contact with John Barber.
Oh
And I
wow. Okay.
immediately, and it took about 3 years to land a book, but
Mm-hmm.
I immediately started Googling how to write comics because I had no idea how to do it. So I started Googling scripts. I started Googling, like, I taught myself via Google, like
Sure.
just
So okay.
reading.
Well, so then, what would you say are some of the biggest adjustments for you in making the jump from prose to comics, right? I
Mhm.
have to imagine just getting your hands on some scripts and just being able to see
That
how
was
some of it was
huge.
done
That was huge.
gives you huge huge education that way. But when did you really, or when does it start to click on things like page design and like how or no, less pace design, but more just story pacing, right? Because now
Yeah.
this is a whole different world from a pacing standpoint, in a sense, than anything you've done prior. So how do you begin to pick some of that stuff up?
Well, fortunately, I'm a very visual writer, period. When I
Okay.
write, it's like a movie that's moving through my head. I see a
Mm-hmm.
movie when I write novels, and it's the same
Okay.
when I write comics. At this point, I had read a shit ton of comics. I had read
Right.
a ton, in the same way that I was a voracious novel reader, I was a voracious comic book reader. So I already had sort of an intuitive sense of flow,
Right.
of
Okay.
pacing. Um, I didn't have the sort of the technical know-how. So suddenly
Mm-hmm.
I had these scripts in front of me, and I'm looking
Right.
at just scripts from a bunch of different writers, really, and just digesting them, getting a sense of what it looks like technically on the page to do this sort of thing. Uh, and it just, and then I just started practicing. I
Mm-hmm.
just practiced. I don't
Right.
know, I just tried my hand at it, and I started writing a lot of sample scripts. And about, well, a couple months or so before NYX, I started showing John Barber these scripts.
Okay.
And John Barber would give me comments back, and he'd be like, okay, so think about movement. Think about how, be sure to always remember you can't have more than one action in one panel.
Mm-hmm.
These are discrete moments. Be watchful for that. Think about pacing. Think about the page turn and reveals, how you can structure comic book pages to hide really important moments and scenes. And so he gave me a lot of mentorship and advice on writing scripts, and just basically how to be better at this,
Mm-hmm.
and which was totally invaluable. Um, and so by the time NYX rolled around, I I felt like I was ready to go. And
Okay.
as I wrote NYX, again, there was still more comments, more mentoring, more
Mm-hmm.
refinement, but I more or less just learned by doing. I
Mm-hmm.
studied, I studied, and then I just acted. And
So how does NYX come about? Is it a, hey, this is a story that we want to do, and we need a writer for it,
yes,
or
that was
okay,
exactly what happened. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And now, so NYX at this point in time is not it's not a superhero book, right?
No,
It's
no.
definitely it's a bit more. So, um, is that kind of what you were hoping for as like a starter, or were
I was
you
hoping
like,
for anything. Jim,
fair?
I listen, I just shoved my foot in the door. I don't care. Like I'm not picky,
Right.
Jim. And the thing is, my thing is give me an opportunity and I will do the best job I possibly can with that
Right.
opportunity and then just keep
Mm-hmm.
going.
Right.
And so I was really intrigued by the concept. I thought it was really cool. I thought it had the potential for a lot of fantastic character moments.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I just took it and ran
Mm-hmm.
and had so much fun with it. Had so much fun working with Sarah Kalman, all these fantastic artists. And then suddenly, John comes to me and he's like, "Well, we need a co-writer in Dark Wolverine."
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to be a very different tone. It's going to be gritty, but you can do gritty. I've seen it. And
Right.
so this is going to work with Daniel Way and, let's see what happens. Talked with
Mm-hmm.
Dan. We got along great. And so suddenly I'm on Dark Wolverine
Right.
and
Which
which
I
was
think, like, at
another,
at the time really felt like you defied a lot of expectations there, right? Because I think initially there was a lot of, um, you had come from NYX, and then you jumping on to Dark Wolverine is like, not that Dark Wolverine was not, or that even Dakin was a character that, um, it was a relatively new character in a sense, right?
yeah.
And so, like, it
Mhm.
was kind of fresh slate-ish in a way, and then, like, I think really kind of became a fan favorite under your pen in a sense.
Listen,
Like,
Dan
you
and I
added
had the best time.
a ton of depth to that character.
We tried. I mean, the thing with Dark Wolverine was, I think for both of us, we could see that again, like you said, this was a fresh character. We could really just go bananas
Right.
and go hard and have fun. And that's exactly what we did.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a fun book to write. That was a
Mm-hmm.
very, very fun book to write. And from there, again, working on Dark Wolverine, that led to Black Widow.
Right.
And
At,
originally, yeah,
at
go
which
ahead.
point, though, somewhere in between, you also, like, you're working on Dark Wolverine, relatively fresh character, but then you're also working on X-23,
I'm trying to
which,
honestly, the timeline is a little fuzzy right now. I should go back. I think X Converse,
maybe, no,
gosh, did
X-23 I know happened after
Black,
Wolverine.
well, it happened, I think, after Black
Oh, you're right. It did
Widow.
happen after Black Widow. I just
Yeah.
remembered.
And
Yeah,
so
you're
I
you're
think
right.
I finished, I think the offer for X-23 may have come up
Okay.
during Black Widow. I actually can't remember anymore.
Sure.
Whoops.
Whatever.
Um, yeah. But originally Black Widow, I didn't think I had an idea for the book. I turned it down. And then
Mhm.
ironically, I turned it down and then 2 hours later, I'm like just doing something else and I suddenly like had one of those light bulb moments and I was like, "Oh
Mhm.
no, 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 I got an idea. I got the idea." And I raced
Mhm.
back to the editor and I was like, "Don't talk to anyone else. I got this. I want
I
to
got
do
it. I
this. I
got it.
got this. I got this." Because if I don't think I have a good idea for a book, I just won't do it. I'm not going
Sure.
to like force it.
Sure.
But suddenly I had it and I was like, "No, I can do this." And so did Black Widow and
Mhm.
then and
Worked
which
with
was
one of my
another.
favorite artists of all time, Daniel Acuna. God, like, that guy
Oh,
is
it was a
so great.
dream. Jim, that was a dream come true. I mean, listen, Jim, I have worked, honestly, no
You've worked with a
lie.
murderer's row of
I've worked with the greatest artists. I've worked with the greatest artists and I love them all. They
uh,
were so, listen, mm,
how
working with
does
Camo, working with Phil Noto,
right.
working with, oh, these guys.
How does collaboration change from partner to partner in a sense for you in that aspect?
You know what? The one thing I discovered really early on is how much I love writing for artists. I
Mm.
really love writing for artists.
Hmm.
And so always I get very inspired by
Hmm.
visual tone, visual,
Right.
like the visual voice.
Hmm.
And so I would just look at their art. I would look at their art on other books. I would look to see what they seemed, really good at, what they love doing. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. When I write a script for a particular artist, I'm keeping that in mind. I want them to be
Hmm.
happy. I
Hmm.
want them to feel energized. Like I want them to enjoy the story as
Right.
well. I want them to enjoy the story perhaps more than anyone,
Right.
because they have to bring themselves to it and they have to bring it
Hmm.
alive. So for me, the happiness of the artist is utmost. And
Hmm.
so I think about artists a lot as I'm working and who I'm working with. Um, and and how that changes from artist to artist just depends on their style. It
Sure.
just depends on their style. You know,
Hmm.
depending on who I'm working with, because some artists prefer more detail in the scripts and others don't.
Right.
They want more tone, they want more vibe. So I
Hmm.
will adjust accordingly.
Is one
Um,
easier or harder for you
no,
than?
no, not really, not at all. It's fine. It's either way. I trust the
Mhm.
artist. I
Sure.
trust the artist I work with to tell
Hmm.
the story,
Hmm.
and the artist is always the person who's front and center. I think the job of the writer is to be not exactly invisible, but in a comic
Right.
book, we're not the first thing that people see. The writer
Sure.
is not front and center. It's the artist. The artist is of
Hmm.
paramount importance. It's a visual medium. And which is not to say that the writer isn't important. We are. We have, we're also telling the story. But
Hmm.
that my job is to tell a great story, but also to remain invisible.
Hmm.
To not, in some ways, to not be noticed. You want to finish reading the story and and be so engrossed by the art and what happens on the page that you don't even, like, you just are in your feelings, basically.
Right.
You
Right.
know. So where were we?
Oh, well, we were talking
That's,
we were going a
that's,
little bit. We were talking about, you wrapped up your time on Dark Wolverine, made the jump to Black
oh yeah,
Widow,
yeah, 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 yeah.
and then I'll ask two last Marvel bits, and then we'll jump into Monstress stuff. But so you know, X you jumping on X-23 is a different, uh, almost a different set of bags of expectations, in a sense that character fans loved X-23,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And so and so do you feel that when you at the start of taking on X-23, because I think, at the end of the day, everyone loved your run on it, but it's a much different project than taking on Dark Wolverine at this point for you, right?
Do you know what's really interesting? I I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question. I don't think it even registered. I mean, I
Uh,
knew, of course, that people loved X-23, but it
right.
didn't affect how I wrote her because I
Sure.
also loved X-23. It's all
I
about
think that
me,
matters,
Jim.
though. But that
Jim, it's all
matters,
about
right?
me. It's like, no, I loved X-23. I thought that this character had so much depth, so much complexity,
Hmm.
had as a character had as a character in the Marvel universe had been through so much. And
Right.
I was I was both honored, delighted, and hungry to explore more of who she was and take her on a journey of healing. Because it felt like where X-23, the
Mm.
character, started, as when I was offered her, was she was a walking wound. She
Yep.
was just a walking wound of a person who had never really experienced love and friendship and didn't really understand what that meant, and had just
Mm.
closed herself off into a very self-protective cocoon. And I wanted to peel back that cocoon and take her on this journey where she really is surrounded by people who care about her. and what that does to a person, how that can allow them to change and become more of themselves, whoever that's going to be. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's how I looked at X-23 and what I held front and center as I wrote her and wrote the relationships that she develops with all the people around her.
Mm-hmm. Mission accomplished.
Thank you. It's a delight. It was one of my, I loved writing that book. I loved writing that book very, very much.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. That's awesome.
Thank you.
And then at the same time too, um, you finish up a run on Astonishing X-Men,
Yep. That
leading
comes
to
later.
a
Yep.
major event in
Hmm.
yeah, yep,
Yep.
in your time there. So at what point, I guess, on the timeline does the seed begin to germinate for Monstress?
Probably towards the end of my X-Men run.
Okay.
I really, really, again, every project I've done at Marvel has been just a joy, just an absolute joy.
Sure.
I really loved writing the X-Men. That was just a super fun book. And towards the end of it, when I knew the book was going to be canceled, I was like, okay, well, what comes next? And Marvel offered me a few projects. And at first I said yes. And then around the same time, Eric Stevenson reached out and he was like, "Hey, are you interested in writing for Image?" And I was like, "Oh, you know what? Maybe I am." Like that actually sounds like a really good idea. That sounds like a really, really good idea. And so I turned down
Mm-hmm.
these other Marvel projects and I said, "Fuck it, let's do it." And um and I floated Sana's name to Eric, and Eric was like, "Great, fantastic," because the whole backstory with Sana was I had worked with her on X-23, and then after X-23 ended, you know, I never forgot Sana. I never forgot her work and how much I loved
Mm-hmm.
her work. Just there had never been another opportunity to work with her again. We hadn't really stayed in contact. Um, and so and when Eric offered me a chance to write an image, I had only the vaguest idea for a story in my mind. I knew that I had, again, I've talked about this before, but my grandmother grew up in China during World War II, and she went through hell.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard a lot of those stories when I was growing up. I'm sure not all of them, but I heard enough. And And so I had this idea in my head that I wanted to write a story about a girl who survives a war. I also had this idea for a girl who is best friends with a giant monster, like a kaiju-sized monster, Godzilla, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't know really how to make it all work, but I knew that that was kind of where I was headed. Um, and so I reached out to Sana. I was like, "Hey, there's this offer on the table from Image to do a creator-owned book. Are you interested?" And she thought I was joking. She was like, "All right." She really thought I was just joking. She had not like she didn't get the support and love that she deserved, I think, from publishers after X-23.
Sure.
And so she had taken a bit of a hiatus doing other things. And so I think she was just like, "Okay, whatever. This is not sure,
Mm-hmm.
sure, sure, Marjorie." and, and
There's a theme
I
here.
was and I was dead serious, Jim. I was dead
Right.
serious. And so I keep I keep going back and forth, and I'm like, "Okay, no, like this is the idea." And she's like, "All right." She's like, "Let me." So I'm working on this idea, and it's none of the things I'm writing. I'm writing like first scripts after another. I'm writing down treatments. I'm writing all this, and none of it's really working.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a couple breakthroughs that happened. The first was that because Sana said, "Well, like, what style are you interested?" And I was like, "Okay, well, a little Art Deco, like whatever, but just make it, sort of Asian Art Deco, Japanese themed Art Deco, but just very like
Mm-hmm.
Asian Asian centric.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, okay. And I'm just like, do whatever, like change your style, just whatever you feel like doing, just do it.
Sure.
Right. So Sana sends me all these sample pages that are so incredible and
Oh
so
wow.
mind blowing and so unlike anything I had ever seen in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, like, the character that eventually would become Zin is this, and they're in. I think these pages are in the first deluxe hardcover, but um, the Zin looks like a ghost, just a phantom hanging in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly I realized that I had been going about this all wrong, which was that this is not a story. This is not just a story about a girl who's friends with an oversized monster. This is a story about a possession. This is a haunting. This is a ghost story about ghosts that get passed down
Mm-hmm.
through the blood, through generations. And suddenly that part locked into place, the themes locked into place. And then the other thing I realized um, was that I was trying to write Micah as a nice person.
Ah.
I was trying to make her nice, and I had to break that in me. I had to
Mm.
break the urge to write a heroine who's nice. Micah's not nice. That doesn't make her a bad person, doesn't make her
Right.
bad, but it's a subtle difference that often gets lost. And I think it's
Mm.
easy to mistake trauma for personality.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, it takes time to get to the heart of a person, and most of us don't have the patience for that. But Micah is someone who has been profoundly altered by abuse, like an abusive upbringing from her mother, and by war. Why would she be nice? It makes no sense,
It's
right?
true. Yep.
Like, she is someone who has a lot of anger and self-hate and rage against the world, and yet she's still someone who deep down wants to be better, who
Mm-hmm.
secretly, desperately wishes she could be a different, better person. And if
Mm.
she didn't want this, then she would never have embarked on the journey of volume one, which has her leaving Tuya and, like, not just to seek revenge, but also to get answers. And she wouldn't have made all of the choices she makes, small and large, across all 9 volumes to help others and forgive. And, forgive herself, forgive her mother, forgive those who hurt her. And so once I once I realized that, once
Mm-hmm.
I broke that part of me that you know that really was like contorting myself in knots, trying to make her someone who she is not, then suddenly everything came together and I
Mm.
had the book.
I love that. Um. So for you, initially at the get-go, is the approach to doing something that is yours, does that feel different than doing, the superhero work for hire work?
It was so hard.
That's what I'm
Jim,
saying.
it was so hard.
That's what I mean. I feel like sometimes some folks,
Jim.
may think that, like, may have the perception that it's just easier because there's no rules. But I have to imagine that because of that, that makes it harder.
So, Jim, listen, now after all of these years, we've been doing Monstress now for 10 years,
Yep.
which is crazy to me. It doesn't feel that long, but now it's a lot easier to jumpstart a creator-owned book because I have the skills. But
Right.
when I started writing Monstress, listen, dude, I thought, because I had written so many comics at Marvel,
Right.
I thought I knew how to write comics. Yo, I was so confident. I was so peppy. I was like, I know what I'm doing. Shit, I'm good at this, right? I got this.
Right.
I didn't know shit. Jim, I did not know
Oh.
shit. I had a very rude wake up call, because it is one thing to, like you said, tell a story in someone else's sandbox where everything is
Right.
established, you know, uh, characters, world, all of it. It's all laid out for you. And it's another thing to come entirely from scratch and not just listen, I bit off more than I could chew. I decided that my first creator owned comic was going to be a big, sprawling, epic fantasy filled with complex politics, racial politics, war. Like I,
Could have
I
told a
was like
small little
thinking,
intimate tale about a
no,
family here and there. Nope. We're
no,
blowing the doors wide
no,
open.
no, Jim. It's when I decide I'm going to do something, I go all the way. I go all the way. So, and I realized very quickly that I did not know what I was doing. That I did not actually know how to. I knew how to write superheroes. I knew how to do a very particular kind of comic. I did not know how to write a sprawling epic fantasy. And so I had to, but fortunately, I had training writing novels. If I had not had that training, I would have been really screwed, even more screwed than I was. So I had to step back, I had to reassess and start from scratch and teach myself how to write comics all over again. But more than that, just teach myself how to tell stories. And
So
it
is
was
there
not
anything that
easy.
you look to for inspiration in that aspect, or is it just like, how an athlete just practices to become better, and it's
Yeah.
just try and try again?
Yeah, every writer's different. Every writer's different.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are other writers who for whom this would not work, but for me,
Sure.
yeah, that's exactly what I did. I sat down. I knew that I was in some ways writing blind. I started writing down the big ideas that mattered to me, who this character is, really kind of just getting into the spirit of the book, of the tale I wanted to tell. And then I just started writing
Mm,
and feeling my way through sort of the darkness.
right.
Um, and again, and for better or for worse, but eventually that led to the book that the first arc
Right.
um, of Monstress Volume One.
And then the praise
Yeah.
rolls in. How does that change things?
Uh, it didn't really. I
Okay.
think. I mean, I'm happy for it. Don't get me wrong.
Sure. Oh yeah. No,
Yeah, that's
I
yeah,
wouldn't think
yeah,
you
yeah,
are,
yeah,
but I know, like,
yeah,
but sometimes is that like, is it? I have to admit, obviously, it's a sense of accomplishment, right?
yeah,
But
absolutely.
does it? But does the kind? I mean, because like they said, like, initially you had the Eisner nominations, and then you inevitably won for the book. Does that
Hmm.
does that at all feel for you? Does that make set the expectations higher now, in a sense?
You know what it does is I I've never been a person who's particularly good at celebrating myself. I'm just not. Like
Right.
I wish I could I wish I was like someone who could say yay a little
Right.
more. And I'm always grateful for good things that come, but I also know how quickly
Hmm.
they can go away.
Sure.
And so for me, I take these moments with gratitude and appreciation, and then I get back to work.
Hmm.
And I know always that the most important thing is the work. And I try not to let myself get distracted by anything else.
Hmm. Fair.
For bet, listen, this is not to say that everything I write is good. Like I feel like I feel very powerfully that some things I write are better than others. Some arcs are better than others. Some books are better than others. But what I always keep front and center is the need and the desire to ignore the noise and just focus on the story and tell the best possible story I can. And that's what I do. That's what I do. So
Okay.
again, the
Well,
yeah, the
but I
praise
think
that rolled in
the
was,
other
oh, please go
I say
ahead.
the other thing that rolls in as a part of the praise is you've begun to grow and cultivate almost a community around Monstress with your readers, where there are a ton of folks who now love talking about the book with one another, have found friends through being fans of this book, and I have to imagine for you that's got to be amazing. That's got to be the fun part,
It is very, I'm not online,
right?
so the only time I ever get touched by any of this is when I actually go out in person,
Hmm.
to an event. And it is a very deep and moving thing
Mm,
to talk to people face to face
mhm.
about the book, even if just for a few seconds in passing.
Right.
It's a very important reminder of, I always told myself early on in my career, if even just one person enjoys the book, then it's worth trying to write it,
Sure.
um, and I appreciate it. I don't
Mm,
know. I don't know how to say it in, when I think about this, in some ways I'm at a loss for words because it it means something very deep to me, and I'm very
mhm.
grateful. I'm very grateful and very deeply, deeply appreciative of the support that we've had from readers. It always goes without saying, but well, it can't be said enough. We can't do this without
Right.
the readers, and we just can't.
Mhm.
And our gratitude is endless, our appreciation is endless, and our love is endless.
Mhm. I love it. All right, I do want to get back to talking about the book itself a little bit because this is we talked about, you really kind of just go for it, and you've built this hugely immersive and expansive world. How are there? Do you have tricks and tips on how to keep track of all corners of the world that you've built here?
I'm the worst. Jim, I'm the worst. I mean, which is to say, listen, um I reread the entire
Mm,
series at least once a year.
okay.
Um and make notes, to remind myself certain, just to basically immerse, because it's not like I am fully immersed,
Hmm.
fully immersed in this universe, in this world. But sometimes a person can be too close to it, and you
Hmm.
have to step back and take the broader view. And so I reread the series about once a year
Okay.
and assess, and think about the things that I have been trying to do, that I want to do, see if they still align, see areas where I've left. um, Sometimes I leave storylines. Um, Nothing in Monstress is is put in there by accident,
Hmm.
and well, not much anyway. So when it comes to the story, there sometimes what seems like a storyline that's been left unfinished
Hmm.
is actually going to be addressed later
Hmm.
on. Part of it is page constraints, but part of it also is just timing,
Right.
where things are laid in place, but it's not ready yet. It's not ready yet to go in the oven. The ingredients have been
Hmm.
assembled, but there are things yet to come. And I make notes, and I wish I could. I don't have charts. I don't have,
Hmm.
I probably should, to be honest. Um, but but I put all the ingredients and all the pieces in place, look at them, assess them, and then just start writing.
Hmm.
And so part of what happens with the Monstress is intuitive, and part of
Hmm.
what happens is not, is very
Mm.
intentional. It's
Okay.
I wish I could give a more concrete answer than that. But
Well, so
it's a
let me ask you
blend.
this.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this then, because Monstress is an ongoing series,
Yes.
and you and Sana are one of very few teams that have a book 55, going to be 55 issues deep and more.
Hmm. Hmm.
Do you find that the flexibility of it being an ongoing lets you live a little bit longer in moments than necessarily having to race to close a loop if it were
Yeah.
something more limited? Have
Yeah.
you
I no,
found
I
yourself in moments where it's like, oh, you know what? I'm going to draw this part out a little bit more because I think I have more to say here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And in fact, I think she and I both feel like we don't have enough pages to do everything we want to do with Monstrous. I mean,
Right.
Sana and I love doing this book. we have a lot of fun with it.
Mm.
And for example, volume 9, we added 16 extra pages to volume 9 of new content when the trade came out, and we would have added more if we could have, because we felt like there wasn't enough space in the individual monthly comics to tell the full story that we really wanted to tell. And in fact,
Sure.
issue 55 that's coming out is 32 pages of story.
Mm.
We did an oversized issue because I think at this point we've decided, just fuck it. We've got so much story we want to tell. We're just going to go for broke and just do it as much as we can. And in
Right.
fact, every single individual issue of Monstress, even if it doesn't seem like it, is not the traditional 20 pages long, 20 pages of story. We're
Right.
always putting in extra, like 24, 26, sometimes 28 pages of story in the comic, as much as we can cram in there, because we have so much to
Mm.
say and it feels like
Mm.
so little space to say it. So, um, so yeah, no, I think for both of us, we just, uh, yeah, like we're I don't know where I'm going with this answer, just to say that
It's all right.
we really love this world, and we like going along with it, and we will be going along with it.
Love it. All right, I'm gonna let's talk a little bit about 55 because you've been so
Yeah.
gracious with your time, and I don't want to keep you too much longer. Let's talk about 55, where the story picks up, what fans can kind of expect, and I guess what are you excited for heading into
Oh.
this kind of next chunk of issues.
Well, it's been an interesting journey for Micah because, in the ninth arc, the last arc, we saw Micah wake up from, I guess, let's call it a coma,
Mm.
and I don't know how much, I won't spoil too much, but more or less
Sure.
she discovers that a year has passed and her father has taken Zin away and used the old god to start a war against the Federation and even the Arcanics. And she's vowed to get Zen back, which is pretty ironic because she has spent a huge portion of the series desperate to rid herself of Zen and blame Zen for all of her problems. And, again, I won't spoil too much of what's about to happen,
Sure.
but let's just say a new problem arises for everyone, even her father, who, in his arrogance, believes that he's untouchable.
Mm.
Um, and so what's, another way to think about the last couple arcs, I suppose, is
Mm.
that the thing about, Mike has been on this quote unquote journey of healing. But the thing to
Mm.
think about healing or thinking that you're healed from whatever torments you is that there's always a relapse. Life
Mm.
sucks. Life really sucks. And life is always going to try and reopen the old wound that you thought was gone.
Mm.
And that's going to happen over and over again, no matter who you are. What matters is how you respond to this. And
Mm.
so, and that's what Micah has been dealing with in the last couple arcs. She was starting to feel better.
Mm.
She got a big slap of reality and did not handle it well. She
Mm.
went back to the dark place of self-destructive hate. And it was easy
Mm.
because it was familiar and it was comfortable. And then she clawed her way out of it. And now in the last arc and this new one, she's faced with a different problem altogether. She got
Mm.
what she always said she wanted. She got her freedom and from the monster inside of her. And the shit still smells the same, except maybe worse. Because
Right.
now Micah has to look inward and figure out who she really is. And she doesn't know. She doesn't
Mm.
know who she is outside this identity of hunger and anger. I
Mm.
mean, for this entire book, she doesn't have hobbies. She barely has friends. She's just been in survival mode for
Right.
years and years, and that's become her identity. And that's not enough to sustain a life.
Mhm.
You can't just pretend to be alive. You have to be in
Mm.
life. And she has
Mhm.
to make that choice again. She's got a new problem. Again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but she's got a new, very big problem. And is she going to apply everything that she's learned? Is she going to find the wherewithal within herself, her own identity? Is her identity enough to sustain her
Mm.
against this new problem that she has to deal with.
Mhm. How do you navigate integrating a lot of the themes you play with in this series, whether it's race or war or feminism, etc., in and have it not overwhelm the narrative? Because I feel like you do a phenomenal job of being able to balance it all, but I have to imagine that that's a lot. That is very hard work and obviously incredibly intentional. But I'd love to just kind of hear how that works, or is it kind of innate for you at this point?
It's a really good question. You're right. It's intentional. Part of it is, I guess it's partially innate,
Mm-hmm.
um, but also, I mean, people want to have fun when they're reading. It can't be all. Listen,
Sure.
I listen. I love. I You can only do so much navel gazing, like before. I mean, yes, there are a lot of heavy themes in Monstress, and and there's a lot of very difficult topics that we address and tackle. But also, we're trying to tell a fun, interesting story. And so people can read Monstress at a lot of different levels.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to read a story about inherited family trauma and war and colonialism and and uh, and trauma, I got you. my, my, come to the book. We got you. If you want to read a steampunk epic fantasy about talking cats and cute
Yep.
little fox girls
We got
and
you.
Lovecraftian monsters in a Miyazaki setting, we got you
Mm,
too.
mm,
I'm trying to do something that's a little bit for everyone,
mm.
and and you don't really even have to think about it. It's just
Right.
it's there. It's a package that you can unwrap in a lot of different ways.
Mm.
uh and yeah, it's a balancing act,
Yeah.
but it's a fun one. It's again, because I love the world and the characters, and because I love Sana and Sana's art, and it's a joy. It's a profound joy to
Mm.
work with Sana. It is, Jim, I cannot say it enough. Sana is a fucking genius. I have never met anyone, I have never met anyone in my life who can, who does what she does, who has the visual verve,
Mm.
the power that she does across different styles. um, whether it's Monstress, whether it's the other series we do, Night Eaters, whether it's X-23, she changes her style from book to
Mm.
book, but with the same power and the same, like, just visual interest and complexity.
Right.
So working with her is a joy and deeply inspiring, but and she also brings her own take to the story, her own, because my scripts are generally pretty light.
Okay.
Again, there are things that will matter to me. There's every now and then there's something that I think should be framed a certain way, because I think it will be there's something I'm trying to that there's something I'm trying to capture that I think will enhance the lettering that's on the page. And so then I'll be very specific. But for the most part, at this point, after 10 years, my scripts are pretty light.
Mm.
And so it's more, it's like a, of course, I break everything down to panels. I give the basic descriptions, but Sana just goes and does it.
Right.
And we just have this simpatico, a shared brain. We kind of
Mm.
understand what the story is.
Right.
And so,
Well, so it's funny because one of my final questions that I had for you was basically going to be, and then I've got two more after this, I promise.
yeah.
What would comic book writer Marjorie Liu today tell comic book writer Marjorie Liu writing NYX?
Oh boy. Again, I've never been asked this question. Hmm. I wouldn't tell her much, to be honest.
All right.
Well, no, because it's the person I was,
Sure.
in
You
some
don't
ways.
get to where you are today without having been the Marjorie of
Yeah.
yesterday.
Yeah,
Right.
no, it's everything that I went through, all the difficulties, all the ups and downs, um, made, yeah, it made this possible.
Mm,
We're not always equipped. I think, I think the one thing that's easy to forget is that we're not always ready to tell the stories that we want to tell.
mm,
You can have the best idea in the world, but you just might not be the writer you need to be to tell it yet.
mm,
And the Marjorie of in my 20s of NYX, was I in my 20s? Fuck. Yeah, I think I was. So I think I was, yes. Um, that's a long time ago, man. That's a really long time ago. So that person who I was then,
mm,
earnest, really just starting out, could not have written Monstress.
mm,
Could not have written Monstress. I needed to do a lot of growing. I
mm.
needed to learn a lot more about myself. I, I needed to, I needed to get therapy. I needed to really, there was a lot of work I had to do, internally
Mhm,
to be the writer who could write Monstrous.
mm,
And I'm sure there's a lot more work I have to do internally to become the writer who's going to write whatever the hell else
right.
is in the future.
Mhm,
That's just the way it is. And so I think, if the advice I would give myself really would just come down to, just be nice to yourself. Just be
mm,
nicer to yourself. It's going to be okay. Just be
mhm,
nicer.
right.
The Sturm and Drang, it's not worth it. It's going to be
Right.
okay.
I love it.
Yeah.
Uh, what what do you hope readers take away from the character of Micah as they read
Hmm.
this?
You know what? Micah begins Monstrous as someone who's very, very. Well, let me pause for a moment, because I think the
Mhm,
lesson to take from this is a lesson I learned from my grandmother. And I've talked about this before in other interviews, but again, my grandmother survived some really horrible things during World War II. And she would talk about some of those things with me from the time I was a small child. It's real appropriate. But you know what? And sometimes, with whatever.
right.
Yeah, immigrant families, they'll tell you anything, and they're like, just deal with it.
Exactly.
So, but the wild thing was that she would tell these horrible, horrible stories, and then she would laugh
Mm,
and she would smile. And this was a woman, and all the pictures I see of her after the war, she's got this big fat grin on her face. And she was always smiling and laughing from the time I knew her. And again, I'm sure one can make an argument she was just, masking, like, she was smiling, crying inside. I don't know. I don't think so. I think that
mm,
this was a woman who was genuinely happy to be alive. She was genuinely happy to have survived the war and gone on and had a bunch of kids, successful business, wearing fabulous clothes. Her friends were all alive, had survived with her. They all survived together,
mm,
immigrated to the same city. She had her girlfriends there. She was genuinely happy to be alive
mm,
and genuinely happy to have made it. And whatever else she dealt with, that came first. This realization, this understanding that she had made it. And the rest, everything else could go fuck itself. She did it. She lived. She did it.
mm,
And I think, when I think about Micah, that for me, that was deeply inspiring, that you can go through hell and come out the other side and years later look back on it and be like, fuck it. I did it. I lived. I made it. And everyone else is dead, but I'm still here. And so when I think about Monstress, I think about Micah, I think about that. I think about that person. I think about someone, Micah, who has gone through hell, still going through hell, who doesn't know how to love herself. She doesn't know how to love herself. She is only just beginning to discover how to have hope that she can become someone better. And I don't know if Micah is someone who will ever truly be okay. But the important thing is that she's trying. She's trying. She wants to try. And that open desire to choose life, to choose healing, to believe in people, even if they turn around and hurt her, but to take the chance to believe in those around her and to seek healing in friendship, healing in even small solidarities with others, is a radical departure from where she was in volume 1 of Monstress. And that's what I hope people take away, that it is possible to heal. It is possible to change. Don't mistake family trauma for personality, that you are more than the sum of your wounds, and that even if people are telling you you're this person, you're never going to change, you got no hope, ignore them. Because I profoundly, profoundly believe that people can overcome and heal. And maybe it will be an imperfect healing. Maybe you'll relapse. Maybe it's going to be ugly, and you're ugly and difficult, whatever. But you can do it. You can do it. I know you can.
I love that. That's pretty much a perfect place to end it, I think. We do. I do one thing at the very end of all these episodes, because the show is obviously designed to get more people to read books, so that way we can continue to talk about them. Mm-hmm. I'd love if you could pick what is a Marjorie comic book recommendation pick. What's your go-to? If someone says, I've never really read comics before or whatever, what are you telling them to go read? Doesn't have to be it's not your own work. Just
yeah. No,
general.
I figured. I highly recommend Super Mutant Magic Academy by Jillian Tamaki. I think that's a fantastic entry point into comics, along with Sleepwalk and Other Stories by Adrienne Tolmine. I really, really love They Called Us Enemy by George Takei. I think that's a fantastic graphic memoir. And I really love Ellen Forney's Marbles, which is another sort of, it's another graphic memoir about her diagnosis of being bipolar.
One more thing. I know I keep saying one more thing, but you're such an interesting person, and I love this. Has been phenomenal. You teach also on top of everything else.
I occasionally teach. I do.
You occasionally teach.
I occasionally teach.
How does that come about, and how different is building a syllabus to crafting story?
So it comes about because you apply for a job. You just good old fashioned way, Jim. Good old fashioned way. You hear about a job opening and you apply for it. But when it comes to
so to be clear, so you are teaching at
MIT. Yes.
Right. And so so they just have a job posting and they say we would like
there's a job
to teach
posting
us about comics.
There's a job posting and you apply.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's the thing about teaching, and about I try to because no one ever taught me. So I just,
Hmm.
well, except I had good mentors, right? But
Right.
everything
You also
I
had
learned,
Google.
I also had Google. So I'm trying to do something that wasn't done for me. I'm trying to I'm structure a class in a way that I think will be useful for the students, not just to write comics, but to
Hmm.
think about story in general across mediums.
Mm.
Because maybe they'll want to write comics, maybe not. Maybe they want to
Right.
write video games, maybe they want to write film,
Hmm.
maybe they want to write a novel. The principles of storytelling remain the same, even if there are technical aspects that change across mediums.
Hmm.
And so I start with the foundation of character, conflict, and world. How do you build character? How do you build like conflicts, narrative conflicts? And then how do we do world building?
Mm.
And I do this specifically for comics, but the students can apply these principles to anything.
Hmm.
And I have them read a graphic novel a week. There's a lot
Okay.
of reading in my class. There's a lot of writing, because the best way to learn how to write is by doing it.
Right.
And but that's it. That's sort of the fundamental structure of my class.
Hmm. What do you find kids? What do you find that college students today? Um, how do they react to the medium in a sense now? Do you feel like it is
Oh,
the same now as it was when you fell in love and discovered the medium, or has it changed?
no, I don't think it's changed at all. I mean, what's
Mm.
fascinating is that I would say a good portion of my students come to my class having never read a comic.
Mm.
They
Okay.
they just read they read the description. They're like, okay, well, I guess this sounds interesting. And so it fulfills a writing requirement. So let me just show up and see what happens. And it's a very beautiful thing to when students who have never read comics, who have maybe only watched comic book films, to discover the medium and fall in love with it.
Mm.
I love that. I love it, Jim. It's
Hmm.
amazing to see how their brains turn on
Right.
reading like George Takei's graphic memoir, They Called Us
Right.
Enemy, just to have them come to class talking about the book and reacting to the art, reacting to the words on the page, the
Hmm.
voice, the lettering. Um, I take a great deal of joy in that. I think for me, my purpose teaching the class, I hope they learn I hope they learn, certain concepts about writing, but I really want to instill a love of reading.
Uh-huh.
That's what I hope that they come away with, a passion for
What
reading comics.
What do you learn from them?
Everything,
Mm.
everything, because I'm reminded of I'm reminded that one can never stop learning.
Hmm.
It doesn't, listen, been doing this for 20 years, doesn't matter. I
Right.
still have a lot more to learn. I have a lot more to learn, Jim. That never
Mm.
ends. Uh, you always have to keep pushing yourself. You can't, for me anyway, I can't stay in one place. I can't be one kind of writer. I can't do it. That's just not in me.
Hmm.
I'm, I'm like a shark. I'm always swimming. I'm always looking, always moving. And when I teach, I'm reminded of that. I'm reminded that it's because I having to talk about writing comics reminds me of fundamental principles that I sometimes forget when I'm in the middle of working.
Mm.
And it reinforces those for me. The things I'm
Hmm.
teaching are not just for the kids, for the students. They're also for me to remind myself I have to pay attention to these things. I have to pay attention to character. I have to apply these concepts to conflicts and world.
Mm.
It's, I'm not immune to letting these things slide. And I have to stay on top of it. As much as
Mm.
I'm asking the students to stay on top of it, I have to do this for
Right.
myself in my professional life.
I love it. All right. this is where we'll end it for real this time. Marjorie, thank you so much for your time today. This was a phenomenal chat. Like I said, for everyone listening, if you're listening to this at the point in which Monstress 55 is about to be on sale, it hits stores in February, so make sure you check it out, and then go check out the previous 9 volumes. It is all good stuff.
Whee!
Guaranteed good time. Absolutely promise. Marjorie, thank you again.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate it.
Well, there you have it, folks. Another episode of Let's Talk Comics in the can. Isn't Marjorie just the best? Thank you so much to Marjorie again for spending so much time with us. She's got a phenomenal career, tons of great advice, I think, nestled in this hour and a half-ish long conversation that we had. So I hope you go and check out. If you haven't checked out any of her other work, definitely go check it out. If you haven't checked out Monstress, what are you doing? It's one of the best books on stands, period. So we're at the end of the show. So thank you, everyone. You got, for those listening kind of in real time, you got an extra episode this week. So I read all of the reviews on the Kyle Higgins episode, and I don't have any new ones yet because I know iTunes takes a little bit of time to refresh itself. But we're going to have more episodes and more opportunities. So again, if you would love to support the show, leave the reviews, leave all the reviews. And then also to show me what you're listening to, when you're listening to. Tag me on social at Jim Viscardi everywhere, at Image Comics everywhere, at Let's Talk Comics everywhere. We will give that the sweet, a crisp virtual high five in the form of a reshare, retweet, etc. So thank you again for everyone listening. I hope you had a good time. There's another good episode coming up. And if you haven't yet, depending on when you're listening to this, New Comic Book Day may have happened already. But here's the good thing. There's always going to be another New Comic Book Day. So head on over to your retailer, pick up some comics, let us know what you're reading. And as long as you keep reading about comics, we're going to keep talking about them. We'll catch you next time.